The sun rose slowly over the Army training base, spreading golden light across the long rows of barracks. The sound of boots echoed on the concrete, mixed with the sharp voices of young recruits preparing for morning inspection. It was a normal day until a stranger appeared at the edge of the field. He was an old man. His back was slightly bent and his beard was white like winter snow. He wore a faded red jacket, torn at the edges, and a simple tan cap that looked older than some of the soldiers on the field. His boots were dusty, his hands rough, and his eyes, though tired, had a quiet fire inside them. The recruits noticed him right away. "Hey, who's that old guy?" one of them whispered. "Maybe he's lost." "This isn't a museum," another laughed. They chuckled quietly, hiding their grins behind straight faces as their drill sergeant moved past. The old man walked slowly, his steps steady but unhurried. He didn't seem to notice their laughter. He just kept walking toward the line of soldiers, like he belonged there. When he finally stopped, he stood next to the youngest recruit in the row. The young soldier stiffened in surprise. The old man gave a small nod, as if greeting an equal, and looked straight ahead, waiting for inspection. The field went silent. Even the wind seemed to pause. Everyone turned to look at the strange newcomer. Who was he? Why was he standing there with the recruits? The drill sergeant marched over, his face turning red. "Sir, this area is restricted," he snapped. "You can't just walk in here." The old man didn't move. He didn't answer. He just stared forward, calm and quiet. The sergeant frowned, but before he could speak again, the sound of an engine echoed from across the field. A black car rolled in through the gates. The soldiers straightened up instantly. The general had arrived. The general was a tall man, sharp and proud, his uniform covered in ribbons and medals. He stepped out of the car, his shoes shining in the morning light, and walked toward the line for inspection. His presence demanded silence. As he passed each recruit, he stopped to correct a crooked badge or a loose button. His voice was deep and controlled, but when he reached the end of the line, he froze. Standing at the edge was the old man in the red jacket. The general's expression hardened. He looked the man up and down, confused. "What is this?" the general barked. "Who allowed this man here?" The recruits looked at each other, barely holding in their laughter. One whispered, "He probably wandered in from the street." The general took a step forward. "This is a military inspection, not a public event," he said coldly. "Sir, please step aside." Still, the old man didn't move. He stood tall, shoulders straight, his eyes fixed ahead like a soldier in formation. That's when the general noticed it, a small patch on the man's sleeve. It wasn't any modern unit insignia. It looked old, faded, and full of history. The edges were frayed, the colors almost gone, but the emblem, a golden eagle with lightning bolts under its wings, was still clear. The general's eyes narrowed. He knew that symbol. He leaned slightly closer, squinting at the patch, then stepped back as if he'd seen a ghost. His jaw tightened. The recruits watched silently now, confused by the sudden change in the general's face. What unit did you serve in?" the general finally asked, his voice softer. The old man turned his head slightly, just enough to meet the general's eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then the old man gave a small smile, one that carried both pride and pain. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The general took a deep breath, still staring at the patch. He had only read about that emblem in the old archives. Task Force Viper, an elite battalion from a war long forgotten. Most of its soldiers were never seen again. The general stepped back and straightened his uniform. His tone changed completely. "Recruits!" he shouted. "Attention!" The laughter stopped instantly. The young men stood stiff, their eyes darting between the general and the old man. They didn't understand what was happening, but they could feel the sudden weight in the air. The general saluted. The old man. Every recruit gasped silently. No, one could believe what they were, seeing a general saluting a stranger in an old jacket. The old veteran slowly returned the salute. His hand trembled slightly, but his eyes stayed strong. The general lowered his arm and turned toward the recruits. "Do you know who this man is?" he asked quietly. No one answered. "This man," the general continued, served in one of the most dangerous units in our history. Men like him carried this country on their shoulders when the world was falling apart. The recruits looked at the old man again, their earlier laughter turning into guilt. The old veteran didn't look at them. He just stood there, eyes forward, as if still standing on a battlefield only he could see. For a long moment, the field stayed silent. Only the sound of the flag flapping in the wind filled the space. The general nodded slowly, almost respectfully. "Welcome back, soldier," he said softly. The old man gave a faint smile. "Didn't know I ever left," he replied quietly. Then he turned and began to walk away, his steps slow but steady. The sunlight touched his patch, making the faded golden eagle glow once more. The recruits watched him go, every one of them feeling a chill they couldn't explain. That morning they had laughed at an old man. By noon they had witnessed a living legend, and though no one said a word, every young soldier on that field knew. They would never forget the day the general saluted the old veteran. The wind carried a quiet chill through the parade ground. The recruits still stood frozen, unsure if what they had just witnessed was even real. A few seconds ago they were laughing. Now, they had watched a general salute a man who looked like he didn't even belong there. The general turned back to face them. His expression was hard again, but his eyes told another story, a mix of respect, guilt, and disbelief. "Recruits," he said, his voice echoing across the field. "You were laughing at a man whose name is written in the pages of history." No one dared to speak. Even the birds seemed to have gone silent. The old veteran stood at ease now, his hands folded behind his back, still facing forward. His faded patch caught the morning light again, and for a brief second, it almost looked like it was glowing. The general stepped closer to him. "Soldier," he said quietly, "if you don't mind me asking, what brings you back here?" The old man smiled faintly. "Old habits die hard, General," he said softly. "I heard the new recruits were being tested today. Thought I'd see what kind of men are carrying the flag these days." A small murmur ran through the line of soldiers. The general noticed and turned sharply. "Quiet!" he barked. "Show some respect." Instant silence followed. The general looked at the old man again. "Sir, you shouldn't have had to prove anything." "Not after what you did." The veteran's eyes narrowed. "Prove?" he repeated. "Every man in uniform has to prove something, every single day." He looked at the recruits now. "Even these boys." "Especially them." The young soldiers lowered their heads, feeling a mix of shame and curiosity. Who was this man? What had he done to earn a salute from a general? The general finally spoke again. "Recruits, this inspection will continue, but you will remember this man's face, because without men like him, none of us would be standing here today." He paused. "You are dismissed, soldier," he said respectfully, but the old veteran didn't move. "Permission to stay in line, General," he said quietly. The general looked surprised. "You wish to join the inspection?" "Yes, sir," the old man said, straightening his back. "Let's see if I still remember how to stand tall." The general gave a small smile. "Very well," he said. "Let's continue." The recruits returned to attention, their faces more serious than before. The general began moving down the line again. But now the atmosphere had changed completely. The laughter was gone. Every step, every salute, every heartbeat felt heavy with meaning. As the general inspected each recruit, the old veteran stood silently beside them, watching closely. Every now and then he gave a small nod of approval or a quiet shake of his head. His eyes were sharp, sharper than anyone expected from a man his age. When the general reached the middle of the line, a young recruit named Miller couldn't stop glancing at the old man. He finally whispered to the soldier next to him, "Do you think he really fought in a war?" Before his friend could answer, the general's voice thundered, "Something funny, Private Miller?" Miller froze. "No, sir!" Froze. "No, sir!" The general narrowed his eyes. "Then perhaps you can tell me what this patch means?" He pointed toward the veteran's sleeve. Miller swallowed hard. "Sir, I don't know," the general nodded slowly. "Exactly. Because they don't teach courage in manuals or drills. They teach it through men like him." The old veteran smiled faintly but said nothing. After a long silence, the general looked at the recruits and spoke again. You laugh at what you don't understand. You mock what you can't match. But someday, if you're lucky, you'll earn the right to wear something that truly means sacrifice. The recruits stood still, their earlier pride replaced by quiet reflection. Then suddenly, a loud sound cracked through the air, a gunshot in the distance. Everyone flinched. The general turned his head sharply toward the training range nearby. A small group of soldiers were practicing target drills, and one of them had fired accidentally before the order. The old veteran didn't move an inch. He simply turned his head slightly toward the sound and muttered, "Safety off! Rookie mistake." The general looked at him surprised. "You noticed that?" The old man gave a small shrug. "You never forget the sound of carelessness, General. Sometimes it costs you a man. Sometimes it costs you everything." The words hit deep. The general said nothing, but his jaw tightened again. When the inspection finally ended, the general turned to the recruits. "Dismissed," he shouted. The young soldiers began to walk off quietly, but most of them kept glancing back at the old man. The laughter from earlier had completely vanished. As the field cleared, only the general and the veteran remained. The sun was higher now, the air warmer, but there was still something heavy between them, something unspoken. The general walked closer. "It's been years," he said softly. "We thought your whole unit was gone." The veteran nodded slowly. "Most are," he replied. "But I promised one of them I'd come back here one day. Told him I'd make sure the next generation remembered what honor looked like." The general's face softened. "You kept that promise," he said. The veteran looked around the empty field. "Not yet," he said quietly. "They'll remember when they understand why we fought. Right now, they only see the uniform, not the man inside it." The general followed his gaze. The flag above them waved proudly in the breeze. "You're right," he said finally. "But today, they learned something they'll never forget." The old man smiled faintly. "That's all I wanted." The general extended his hand. "It's good to see you again, soldier." The veteran took it firmly, their hands meeting with silent respect. "Next time," the general said, "let me know before you show up." "You nearly gave my men a heart attack." The old man chuckled. "Then maybe they're not ready yet," he said. As he turned to leave, the general called after him, "You're welcome here any time. Task Force Viper will never be forgotten." The old veteran stopped for a moment, looking back over his shoulder. "Let's hope so, General," he said. "Because men like us, we never really leave the battlefield." He walked away slowly, his red jacket glowing against the sunlight, the patch on his arm catching the light one last time. The general stood alone on the parade ground, watching him go, knowing he had just shaken hands with a piece of history, and somewhere in the distance, the faint echo of marching boots seemed to whisper through the wind, reminding everyone that heroes never fade. They just grow older. The afternoon sun had begun to sink lower, casting long shadows across the empty parade ground. The recruits were gone, the base had grown quiet again, and only the old veteran and the general remained. For a while, neither of them spoke. The wind moved softly between them, carrying the distant sound of training drills from the far side of the camp. The general finally broke the silence. "Your patch," he said quietly. "It's been a long time since I've seen one like that." The old man didn't answer right away. He looked down at the patch on his sleeve, the golden eagle with lightning bolts under its wings, faded but still proud. His fingers brushed against it like he was touching a memory. "Most men who wore this never came home," he said finally. "And those who did, well, they didn't talk about it." The general nodded slowly. "Task Force Viper," he whispered. "I read about them in the archives. A classified unit. Missions so deep behind enemy lines that no reports ever came back. They said every man was presumed lost." The old veteran smiled faintly. "That's what they wanted people to believe." The general frowned slightly. "You mean—" The old man turned his eyes toward the horizon. His voice dropped low, almost like he was talking to himself. "We were sent on a mission that was never meant to succeed. Officially, we didn't exist. Unofficially, we saved thousands." The general's heart beat faster. "What happened?" The veteran's eyes darkened. "You ever wonder why this base was rebuilt?" he asked suddenly. Why there's a new training ground over there instead of the old one? The general blinked, surprised. Because the old one was destroyed years ago. There was an accident, the old man interrupted softly. It wasn't an accident, General. It was a battle. The general stared at him. A battle? Here? The veteran nodded. Right here. Same ground your recruits stand on today. We were called ghosts even back then. Task Force Viper wasn't supposed to be remembered. But we fought a secret enemy that nearly wiped this place from the map. The general took a slow step forward. Why has no one ever spoken of this? Because it was covered up, the veteran said simply. They buried it under new buildings and new names. But the truth never stays buried forever. He looked down at the earth beneath his boots, eyes full of old pain. There are men under this soil who gave everything. And that patch, he said, tapping it gently, isn't just cloth. It's a promise I made, to never forget them. The general's voice trembled slightly. You were the commander? The old man gave a tired laugh. I was the youngest, barely 20 when I joined. I survived because others didn't. That's not something you feel proud of, General. That's something you carry. A heavy silence followed. The wind picked up, lifting dust across the parade ground. The sound seemed to echo like distant gunfire. For a moment, the general could almost see it. Flashes of light, men shouting, explosions in the dark. He looked at the old man again. You said it wasn't an accident. What really happened that day? The veteran's expression hardened. We were guarding a transport convoy, nothing unusual. Then, out of nowhere, we were hit. Enemy forces swarmed us. It wasn't supposed to happen. Someone leaked our position. His voice cracked slightly. We fought for hours. The ground shook from artillery. My brothers, my friends, they fell one by one. And when the smoke cleared, he stopped, swallowing hard. I was the only one left standing. The general's throat tightened. He wanted to say something, but no words came. I sent a signal for extraction, the veteran continued, but no one came. We were ghosts, remember? Ghosts don't get rescued. He looked down again at the patch. When I finally made it back, the higher-up said there was no record of the mission. No unit by that name. They said I was mistaken. Or maybe insane. The general's fists clenched. That's impossible. The old man gave a half smile. Is it? You'd be surprised what people forget when it's convenient. He turned his head, eyes locked on the general. You see, General, that's why I came back today. Not to prove who I am, not to show off medals, but because I wanted someone, anyone, to remember that this place isn't just dirt and stone. It's where heroes fell, and they deserve more than silence. The general took a slow step forward. Why tell me this now? The old man's eyes softened. Because soon there'll be no one left who knows. I'm the last. And when I'm gone, so will their story. A lump formed in the general's throat. He looked at the old man's patch again, realizing that it wasn't just a symbol. It was history sewn into fabric. Then let me help you, he said quietly. Let me tell their story. The veteran shook his head. No, General. Some stories are meant to be found, not told. If people hear it too soon, they'll only see glory. But it wasn't glory. It was sacrifice. Let them learn the meaning of honor first, the general hesitated. Then what do you want me to do? Remember, the old man said simply. That's all. When you walk this ground, remember that brave men once stood here. Don't let them fade away completely. The general nodded slowly, deeply moved. But then, something strange happened. The sky darkened for a moment as a thick cloud passed overhead. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a faint echo, like distant voices. The veteran looked up, his expression unreadable. You hear that? He whispered. The general frowned. Hear what? The old man smiled faintly. Them. They never really left. The man smiled faintly. Them. They never really left. The general's skin prickled. He looked around the empty field, but there was no one there, only the sound of rustling flags. The old veteran took a slow breath. Every time I come here, I feel them watching. Not angry, just waiting. Waiting for what? The general asked quietly. The old man's eyes gleamed, almost shining in the dim light. For someone worthy enough to carry the patch again. The general stared at him, his chest heavy with emotion. He wanted to ask what that meant, but before he could, the old veteran turned away, starting to walk toward the gate. Where are you going? The general called after him. The old man paused. "To finish something I started a long time ago," he said. "If I don't come back, tell them the patch still stands." And then he walked away, his figure fading slowly into the evening haze, leaving the general standing alone on the field, the words, "The patch still stands," echoing in his mind. The next morning, the base was unusually quiet. A soft mist hung in the air, wrapping the parade ground in pale gray. The general stood near his office window, staring out toward the field where the old veteran had stood the day before. Something about that man's last words wouldn't leave his mind. "If I don't come back, tell them the patch still stands." He had spent the entire night trying to find records of Task Force Viper. Every file he opened ended in blacked-out lines and missing pages. It was as if that unit had been erased from history. But the general knew what he had seen in the veteran's eyes: truth, pain, and loyalty that time couldn't destroy. A young officer knocked on his door. "Sir," he said hesitantly, "there's something you should see." The general followed him outside. At the front gate, near the old oak tree that marked the edge of the base, something had been left behind. The red jacket. It hung neatly on the fence post, perfectly folded over the wire, the golden eagle patch facing outward. The cap rested gently on top. The general felt his chest tighten. "Where's the man who left this?" he asked quietly. "No one saw him, sir," the officer replied. "Security checked the cameras. Nothing. He's just gone." The general stepped closer, touching the old fabric. It was cold from the morning air, but still carried the faint smell of oil and dust, the scent of a soldier's life. He looked at the patch, the golden eagle catching the weak sunlight. For a moment he thought he saw it shimmer. Behind him, the recruits had gathered silently, drawn by curiosity. None of them spoke. They just watched as the general slowly lifted the jacket and held it against his chest. "This man," the general said softly, his voice trembling, "stood here yesterday and reminded us what honor means. He fought in a war none of you have read about, a war that took everything from him, except his pride." He looked at the young soldiers, each one standing straighter than before. "Yesterday you laughed. Today you'll learn." The general raised his chin. "Form up!" The recruits snapped into position, their eyes locked on the red jacket in the general's hands. "We will hold a moment of silence," the general continued, "for the men of Task Force Viper, and for the one who returned, only to remind us what we forgot." A long silence followed. The flag above them fluttered softly in the wind, and then something strange happened. As the general placed the red jacket over the flagpole base, the wind shifted. The flag rose high, snapping with sudden strength as if saluting. The sunlight broke through the clouds, covering the patch in golden light. One of the recruits whispered, "Sir, do you see that?" The general didn't answer. He simply stood there, eyes wet, staring at the light dancing across the patch. In that glow, for just a second, he could almost see them, faint silhouettes of soldiers standing behind the old oak tree, helmets shining, rifles resting at their sides, all facing the flag in perfect formation. The general blinked, and they were gone. He straightened, saluted the empty field, and whispered, "The patch still stands." The recruits followed his lead, each one raising their hand in a crisp salute. No one laughed this time. No one moved. They all felt it, the presence of something far greater than themselves. When the wind finally settled, the red jacket fluttered once and rested still. From that day on, the base carried a new tradition. Every year, on that same morning, recruits gathered at the oak tree. They stood in silence, facing the old red jacket and its golden eagle patch. No one ever saw the veteran again. But some nights, when the wind blew just right, soldiers swore they could hear faint footsteps on the parade ground. Slow, steady, and proud. And somewhere in that quiet rhythm, the spirit of the old veteran still walked. Guarding the field he never left, because heroes don't disappear. They just march on, unseen.